So yeah, WWE Unreal Season 3 is out. It remains a very slick, very polished docu-series, one that I think is going to go down very well with very casual wrestling fans or even people who don't know about wrestling at all. But I'm not one of those. I'm a bitter loser, and that means that I'm going to talk about just a few of the ways I think the docu-series has maybe misrepresented certain things, maybe also a couple of the ways WWE have maybe kind of told on themselves a little bit through what is shown and not shown in Season 3 of WWE Unreal. They've, I think, again, misrepresented the way certain things are, not in just a cutting things for time sort of way, I think in quite a sneaky little way as well. At times. We'll go through a few of the key ones. Let's start by talking about, I think, the biggest thing to come out of Episode 1 of Season 3, John Cena's vision for his heel run. Yeah, Cena opens Season 3 by talking about how the why is the important thing in wrestling, the reason for everything that's happening. And he guarantees that he'll be able to give us a why, a reason, for every aspect of his heel run. Yeah, I doubt it, mate. Cena explains that the original idea for his heel turn was to be deliberately bad and deliberately boring because that was his aim as a bad guy, to suck the fun out of wrestling, make people hate him, and make people want to see him get beaten more. Bit weird that they've come out and said this in Season 3, when Cena, by the time frame that this season is covering, Cena's already a babyface again. You know, why haven't they elaborated on this point more in Seasons 1 and 2, when he was actually a heel? What? I think that's because in Seasons 1 and 2, even though there were certain little references, little clues that the heel run wasn't really going as well as they'd hoped, they kind of glossed over it a bit. That could have been a real deep exploration of audience reaction, audience expectations, and taking risks in wrestling. And instead, it felt a bit, oh, don't look at it too much. Almost like now with a bit of distance from the situation, at the start of Season 3, they've thought, right, let's start this season off with a bit of an explanation as to why the heel run was the way it was. And worse than that, they have misrepresented this heel run now. They're kind of gaslighting us a bit. They're kind of saying, yes, Cena's idea was a bit too crazy, a bit too radical, whereas the idea that we, compromised on him with is what ended up happening. And it was great, wasn't it? No, it wasn't great. Cena admits that this initial idea, the sucking the fun out of wrestling, the being deliberately boring and everything, he admits that this wouldn't have worked and they changed direction. This is characterized by Triple H saying like, whoa, John's idea was a little bit too extreme. It was threatening to turn people away. We still want to sell tickets. We couldn't go with his idea. Wasn't well received anyway, but they're just pretending that it was. And just as a side note, let me ask you this, right? These sort of discussions always bring the old podcasters out to say, if the fans don't like it, that's just good heel heat. That's just good heel heat. And the fans are stupid marks and they don't understand. If that's true, then why did WWE chicken out of going with Cena's initial vision here? Because that's a perfect example, deliberately annoying the fans. And if it's all just good heat, why didn't they go for it here? But anyway, yeah, this is a weird start to the season. Because they say, yeah, man, we ditched Cena's original plan and we switched to Triple H's new, better plan because Triple H is the best and he's a genius. They don't say those words exactly, but that's the vibe. And instead of going with Cena's deliberately boring strategy, we instead had these awesome historic rematches with key wrestlers from his past like Orton and Punk and R-Truth and stuff. So that was the improved idea, was it? Because need I remind you, those were the matches that were getting criticised as the heel turn was going on. People were down on the heel run anyway. We didn't really get a chance to see what Cena's vision would have looked like and how successful it would have ended up being, bar, I think, maybe one or two early promos, straight after he turned heel at Elimination Chamber. And after that, that seemed to be the sort of time it was kind of, let's not go with it. Let's just go kind of a more predictable route. Again, we see the writers kind of discussing how risky Cena's idea is and they don't want to go with it. They joke about an idea that he's pitched where he wants to lose via count-out and they're like, oh, I don't know if the fans will come back after that. And it's characterized as Triple H pulling this idea back from the precipice, saving the day. I think the overall effect that I'm trying to get at here is that Unreal paints Cena as a great mind for the business, but maybe slightly too radical a thinker, whereas Triple H is like the wise head of creative who snapped John out of it and helped him create something better. Cena even says this directly to the camera in one of his talking head bits. He says, Paul told me, hey, you're swinging too big. And he was right. It didn't work anyway. Once again, just for emphasis, this discussion happens in season 3 after Cena's already turned babyface. Why wasn't this a major talking point in seasons 1 or 2? Sounds like it was quite a key discussion going on at the time. Why did they hide that from us then? And yet again, WWE Unreal stands as kind of a monument to the creative genius of the game. And this time it's at the expense of John Cena. We've seen previous bits in previous episodes in earlier seasons of like LA Knight getting chewed out by Triple H because Triple H knows better. But for it to be John Cena kind of submitting to Triple H's wisdom, I find that insane. Like, Cena here is basically taking the bullet for bad creative regarding the final chapter of his career. He's basically saying, my idea was bad, Triple H's idea was better, and Triple H saved my retirement run. When the reality is, Triple H's idea didn't work either. And yet somehow, Cena's taking the blame for this. And somehow he's okay with doing so. He really is the ultimate company guy. I guess it is in character for Cena to do this. But if ever there was a time that I just wanted John to be a little bit more like Bruno Sammartino or a little bit more like Bret Hart, still a company legend, but one who wasn't afraid to kind of stand up for himself a bit more, now would be the time. Now, this video isn't going to be all negative. One positive thing here, even though at the time, unfortunately, the match didn't quite click with me as much as I would have liked it to, Unreal has given me a bit more of a renewed appreciation for the mixed tag match between CM Punk and AJ Lee and Seth Rollins and Becky Lynch at WrestlePalooza. And I think a lot of the credit here must go to AJ Lee. She's really one of the highlights of season 3, in my opinion, because she's really real and she's not afraid to admit when she's feeling anxious or negative or nervous, which obviously is all at play as she's building up to her in-ring return after so long away, and she doesn't try and hide that. There's also a really cool point that I didn't think of at the time the match actually took place, which is AJ saying that, you know, in the 2010s, she did a lot to change the landscape of women's wrestling and what was possible for women in WWE, but she was never able to experience the benefit of those changes herself because she stepped away. But now finally she's back and she is able to experience that. She's able to wrestle a match with announce table spots and stuff. She's able to reap the rewards of the process she started before she left. That's really cool. But this isn't a video about good things, because also at WrestlePalooza, we had Cena losing to Brock Lesnar. If you don't remember, right, at WrestlePalooza, maybe the worst show of 2025, we had babyface John Cena making his entrance with all these kids, so heartwarming, classic John Cena, and then he gets easily squashed by Brock. Now in the doc, Cena's justification for this is that he's on his way out. So he doesn't care if it makes him look weak, because it helps Brock. And then Brock can pass that momentum on to somebody else down the line, which we'll pick up later on in the season with Obafemi, of course, at WrestleMania 42. But I don't think it's that straightforward. There's a few issues I have with Cena's theory here. One, Brock's Brock. He doesn't need to beat Cena to look strong. He's already done more than enough in his career to look strong. Really, this match itself never needed to happen at all, in my opinion. Reason number 2, I think it felt cheap. If you're going to promise us one final match between Cena and Lesnar, there's a certain weight of expectation for everybody attending or tuning in. Especially because they've already done this very thing back in 2014 when Lesnar squashed Cena then. But back then, it was the first time it had happened. It was way more shocking and way more effective. And finally, this is a bit nitpicky, but I'm going to go with it. Cena getting squashed by Brock doesn't necessarily just make Cena look weak. It makes all the people he beat in his retirement run look weak relative to Brock as well, indirectly. Cody, Orton, Punk, etc., I think were all incredibly negatively affected by this disaster of a booking decision to have Lesnar squash Cena. And I think later on, Gunther as well, you could even argue, the man to beat Cena, of course, in his last ever match, which we'll talk about in a bit, because that match was very back and forth, very competitive, whereas Brock's just waltzed in and easily beat Cena a few months before that. So why did it take Gunther so long if he's such a destroyer? But I guess, you know, this is a tricky argument, because you could say the same thing about Obafemi beating Brock at WrestleMania. You know, if Oba's beaten Brock so easily, why couldn't anybody else do that? But I think that instance is far more justifiable, because with Oba, you're trying to create a new star, not just bolster an existing one who doesn't really need it anymore, like Brock. And also part of that story was Brock underestimating Oba at first and not really going into the match prepared enough. Anyway, back to WrestlePalooza, they show us highlights of Cena getting pummeled by Brock. And in the doc, Cena says, the fans hated this. And it really worked, because there's now a growing resentment towards Brock Lesnar. No, there's no growing resentment. towards Brock. It's already there. I would go as far as to say if Brock versus Ober at Mania 42 had happened without this WrestlePalooza match between Cena and Brock ever taking place, I think it would have worked exactly the same. You didn't need to feed Cena to Brock to get Ober over at Mania. Brock's not some, weekly appearing main eventer 5 years into his career whose legacy is still very much being molded and shaped by these big wins and losses. He's already Brock Lesnar. Moving on, in his next talking head bit, Cena says, "My next opponent was supposed to be Drew McIntyre, but sorry, Drew, you can't ignore the indicators. Give the fans someone they want me to face." Bit of a slight at Drew there. A very minor one, but Drew's a weird presence in Season 3 of Unreal. Because at the time, he was playing quite a crucial role. He crops up in a lot of the different stories covered. He wins the belt from Cody at one point, then drops it back to him. That doesn't really get mentioned. He's interfering in matches and stuff. He's cropping up to interfere in the Rumble, that sort of thing. And they don't mention him much at all. It made me a little bit confused, actually. I know that not everybody can be one of the featured talking heads on Unreal, and you've got to focus on the ones giving you the most material. I found it, whenever Drew appeared, he was like a little ghostly figure who just wandered in. People might be watching this thinking, who's that Drew guy who just keeps cropping up in all the important places? Like Forrest Gump, but nobody mentions him. But anyway, this leads, Cena saying, give the fans what they want. This leads to Cena versus AJ Styles, of course, which is framed as a fan-created match. Cena talks about putting out a tweet asking if people want to see himself versus AJ one last time. And of course, everybody says yes. But then he can't just leave it there, or the documentary can't leave it there, I should say. Because then Cena talks about, and then Triple H listened and wisely booked the match. It's a weird double message going on there. Because on one hand, Cena's saying, you guys did this, the fans made this match happen. But the undertone, the thing that's meant to linger in the back of our minds subconsciously, is also Cena saying, you guys made it happen, and Triple H put it together. What a guy, man. And it might just feel like I'm overreacting to a very small thing there. But I'm doing so because a very common criticism of WWE over the last year or two has been the very opposite of this message here. The criticism is that WWE Creative is far more determined by the wishes of TKO and the shareholders and everything, the money people, than it is by the fans. Yeah, this felt like another lie from Unreal Season 3, really. A blatant misrepresentation of who really is pulling the strings behind the scenes in WWE. Of course, they can't admit that. They can't come out in this, feel good, behind the scenes peek at everything and say, yeah, we just do whatever's going to make us the most money, or whatever our bosses think's going to. They can't do that, but don't lie and say the very opposite. I'll bounce it out with another positive here. I liked seeing Seth pretend to be annoyed at Cena and AJ for tearing the house down in Australia, because now Seth's got to go out and wrestle the main event, and he's like, you guys suck, which is funny. I like the part where Cena was helping the kids rehearse the entrance before the match at WrestlePalooza with Brock. That was very heartwarming to see as well. There's real moments, there's things like Seth being hit by injury while defending his title and his devastation at that, but he is kind of bravely going ahead with being written off TV by being destroyed by Bron Breakker despite already being injured when he has to take that spear. And before that happens, we get I think one of the most intense scenes of the documentary, Heyman and Seth firing up Bron backstage to not take it easy on the spear just because Seth's injured. Really lay it in, because when the Vision turns on Rollins and writes him off, it has to be believable. And Heyman is intense here. We get some of the old ECW locker room motivator Heyman, who's like, do it, lay him out. This pays everybody's bills, not just your bill, everybody's. I'm like, whoa, it was uncomfortable, but it was fascinating viewing. Liv Morgan is one of the featured stars of this season as well. We see her returning from injury to cost Cena the IC title against Dominic Mysterio. That was a fun schmoz of a match with lots of run-ins and twists and turns and stuff. I don't have too much to say about that, but we will return to Liv later on when she crops up again in later episodes in the season. For now, we need to talk about John Cena's retirement because it's fast approaching. So Unreal presents John Cena's retirement show as the ultimate passing of the torch ceremony. Out with the old, in with the new, the story never ends, etc. And a big deal is made here of the card featuring several of the bigger names down in NXT, because Cena really wants his final show to represent a beginning for some younger talent. And that all sounds great in theory. I just find the way it's presented to be a little bit overblown compared to what actually ended up happening. I mean, let's see what happened. Cena's last show included Obafemi taking on Cody Rhodes, but the match was ruined due to interference from Drew McIntyre. It also included two kind of more experienced names in AJ Styles and Dragon Lee, beating a pair of younger stars in Javon Evans and Leon Slater. And Sol Ruka beat Bayley, to be fair. 1 out of 3 ain't bad, I guess. Wow, what a changing of the guard the show turned out to be. Why did the show not take place, or why did Cena's retirement rather not take place at WrestleMania, but on its own like bespoke, smaller show? Well, Cena explains that he didn't want it to take place at WrestleMania because WrestleMania doesn't need that boost. WrestleMania is going to sell out on its own, he says. So Cena says he'd rather his retirement show comes on a random Saturday night. That's what he says, a random Saturday night in the final quarter of the year, because the final quarter of the year is the worst financial quarter for the company. And that's good business sense, man. I can't argue with that necessarily. But it's just kind of sad and uninspiring to hear wrestling talked about in such undisguised, financially motivated terms. And also, Mania 42's attendance was down from the previous year. Right, moving on. Now, before Cena's retirement show, we see Triple H running through the plan for Cena's post-match retirement ceremony in detail, in front of everybody, including Cena. I think I'm a little naive Marky Mark. When I watched that moment live, I would have liked to have thought that it was a bit more spontaneous and certainly a surprise to Cena than it actually turned out to be. You know, don't show us that. Another positive thing, Cena talks about his conversations with Stu, the cameraman, during his entrances as a way to he says it's a way to show appreciation, not just to Stu himself, but to all the people, all the unsung heroes behind the scenes, like Stu, but in various different departments that never get mentioned, but without whom the show could not go on. Good, yes, I do like that. And I should say, for all my gripes about the season and everything, Cena does, of course, come across like a really good guy at heart, whether it's his work with children and charities and all that stuff, or the way he conducts himself around younger wrestlers who are maybe a bit nervous and everything. Of course, Cena comes across really well, but it's unsurprising. But it's good to see still. I also enjoyed seeing CM Punk and Bayley just being absolute fans during Cena's last match, watching it from the crowd. And then we get, the infamous finish of this match, Cena versus Gunther, with Cena caught in the sleeper and smiling and doing, what he doesn't do, giving up, tapping out. This caused a lot of debate at the time. And personally even, I still can't work out whether I like it as a finish or not. It's definitely a bold, risky finish, and to my pleasant surprise, they acknowledge its immediate unpopularity in the building here. And at first I was willing to write off this video basically and be like, you know what, they have embraced some of the negativity in this documentary. Maybe it is a bit more of an honest season than I thought. But then no, unfortunately, and perhaps somewhat more predictably, it is framed as the fans don't know what's good for them, Whereas the real masters, the real creative minds in WWE, they know really what's best. Which is a mad thing to hear when we've just seen Triple H being booed at his post-show press conference massively, and then we cut to then we're being lectured about how we don't know what's best. Well, the results would indicate... Anyway, they also attempt to justify this finish by talking about how, because of it, directly because of it, Gunther has now come out, a bigger deal than he was before. Has he really, though? Is he in a better place now than he was before this? Because he barely made the WrestleMania card and arguably only did so due to an injury. I think Gunther was in a better place before retiring Cena. Not in terms of maybe his reputation and the way he was looked at and his aura, but in terms of his place on the card and the time he was allotted and the matches he was having. It's before, all day. Next up, now this is I think, right, so this is the Royal Rumble episode. This is, I think, the biggest piece of news that I've seen floating about online to come out of Season 3 of WWE Unreal. It's the news that Bron Breakker was initially considered or pitched to be the winner of the Men's Royal Rumble match, which didn't end up happening, of course. And the big thing that everybody has rightly latched onto when reporting this news is that Triple H turned it down, and he turned it down because he was worried it would feel like Bron Breakker was being shoved down the audience's throats. And of course, the hypocrisy there is that Roman Reigns ended up winning the Royal Rumble. And he's been the biggest, most dominant star of the decade by a mile for WWE. And it's not even close. And I agree. I agree that Roman winning the 2026 Rumble was a particularly unimaginative booking decision. The one caveat, I mean, it did give us a brilliant WrestleMania main event between Roman and Punk. That's the one saving grace. But I also want to look at, and again, the news stories were all right to focus on, Triple H turning him down because he didn't want it to feel like he was being shoved down the audience's throats, and how nonsensical a thing to say is that. But I also want to focus on the way that it's presented in the documentary too. So Braun is pitched as a potential Rumble winner. Triple H is uncertain about this and says what he says. And then, very soon after that, we are shown Braun's very scary moment at Survivor Series War Games, where he lands right on his neck, manages to bravely somehow carry on the match and do really well. And it's portrayed as this moment where, Braun proves that he's ready for the top. He's a warrior, he's a star, he's got everything needed. And it also shows, explicitly, it shows this in a conversation backstage after the match between Triple H and Braun Breaker. It shows that Braun is willing to do anything for the good of the company, for the good of Triple H and everything. And he even says that. He's like, I'll wrestle with a broken freaking neck for you. This is odd. Why would they show us all of that? Only for WWE to then turn around and say, yeah, we don't know if you're ready to win the Rumble yet, actually, mate. It's really unusual. And I think it makes WWE seem particularly heartless here. I don't think it's ever properly justified. Anyway, some positive stuff again. We get some nice behind-the-scenes stuff with Trick Williams and Obafemi. And then we move into Triple H talking to CM Punk about how, wow, look at these guys coming up from NXT, man. They're so talented. It feels like Triple H says this to Punk, it feels like more than ever, the top guys right now are so willing to, move over and let them have the spotlight. Does it? It's not just this one conversation between Punk and Triple H either. This is a big theme throughout the season. And I don't think it rings true at all. Feels a bit tone deaf, because to me, the top of the card in WWE is three people by a distance: Roman, Cody, and CM Punk. And then you've got Rollins a bit below them, Lesnar whenever he's kind of around as well. And then the gap is massive. And none of these guys at the top are particularly young. How old was The Rock when he was, at the peak of his powers? He was in his late 20s, early 30s. That's the age that the Trick Williamses, the Obafemis and stuff, that's the age they are approaching now. And they are nowhere near that level. And they even talk about how, so-and-so is so young. He's in his late 20s. That is young for a wrestler, but that does not mean you should cap their potential or, keep them on hold for a while. Just to hammer this point home, a bit later on in the Elimination Chamber episode, which I'll talk about in more detail in a bit, there's a scene where Trick Williams is making his entrance, and Paul Heyman is shown behind the curtain, just saying wow, this guy's a star, this guy's a monster, he's going to be huge, this year is going to be a breakout year for him. Really, Paul? Because it's July now, and I think if there was another Elimination Chamber match tomorrow, Trick Williams, given his trajectory since then, would be a maybe for the Chamber match lineup. Probably wouldn't be in it this time. Now, I'm not blaming, the top stars, Punk, Roman, and Cody themselves. I'm not saying that necessarily they are actively unwilling to move aside and let other people shine. I don't know how true that is at all. But WWE certainly isn't pushing people fast enough. I did a whole video about it quite recently on the channel. You'll be able to find it. It's the one with Obafemi in the thumbnail. Anyway, the two Rumble matches happen. Liv Morgan wins hers. Big moment. Shots of her celebrating backstage and all that. And let it be known at this point, Triple H makes the very bold claim that Liv is on her way to becoming the biggest women's star WWE has ever had. The biggest. Bigger than Chyna, bigger than Becky Lynch, the biggest. I think at this point we need to remember that WWE's women's division is in a far lower place than it was in 2019 when Becky main evented WrestleMania. And the women's division in recent years has fallen so dramatically and so quietly, and it's so at odds with everything WWE loves to say that they do for women's wrestling. I wouldn't be surprised if this was a directive from above rather than a WWE creative kind of thing. Because it's been quite dramatic in recent years, since the TKO merger, basically. And I wouldn't be surprised, and this is just me theorizing, I don't know anything about this situation, this is just guesswork from me, but I wouldn't be surprised if the higher-ups had thought, the women aren't selling as much merch, so rather than trying to build them up so they can become big merch sellers again, let's just not feature them as much, it's a waste of time. I wouldn't be surprised. Anyway, the weird ending of this Rumble episode of the docuseries is, of course, Roman winning the Men's Royal Rumble. Roman, who hasn't featured at all in the episode so far, but of course steamrolls his way back into the company to win the Royal Rumble and book his ticket to WrestleMania. And this goes against everything we've been told so far. The overarching theme of the season, the new stars on the rise, Cena's leaving, but look at all this young talent we've got coming up. Well, look what happened in the Men's Royal Rumble. Look who wins the match, Roman. And look who doesn't win. It's not Braun Breaker, who we've been told is the future. It's not someone like Trick or Ober, who we've also been told is the future. It's not even Gunther, who we've been explicitly told has now been built up beyond belief because of this retiring of John Cena. It's not him, it's Roman. Yeah, Roman wins, and they fly past it. They're like, yeah man, Roman wins the Rumble, he's going to be in the main event of WrestleMania. Right, on to the next episode. I'm like, whoa, slow down. That motorbike roared past it. It's done it in a few videos now. I don't know if it's the same motorbike. That was the one time that it was actually relevant to what I was saying. It's going to look embarrassing if you didn't actually hear the motorbike come through on the audio. I promise you one roared past as I was saying, whoa, slow down, I promise you. Now, interestingly, there's no mention of why Roman wins the Rumble. And that silence from WWE is very telling, I think, here. And that's because there were all these rumours at the time Roman won the Rumble, remember? Rumours that him winning was not a WWE creative decision, it was a TKO decision. And they were like, hey, why don't you just go back to when the Bloodline were hot and have Roman on top again? And then maybe things will just automatically be as good again as they were back then. But in WWE Unreal, they don't mention this or even allude to this as a possible contributing factor to the booking decision. One, because it would admit weakness, and two, because it flies directly in the face of everything that Season 3 has supposedly been about so far. Cultivating new talent, giving opportunities. And Roman wins the Men's Rumble and they fly past it. It's like they don't want to talk about that happening. Anyway, we get more good stuff around Elimination Chamber. And again, I think it's the stronger parts of this docuseries because it's the more genuinely no-frills, real stuff. Often kind of sad or kind of hard to watch, especially Punk and AJ dealing with the loss of their dog. Stephanie Vaquer's long, hard journey to where she is now. She talks about her hardships growing up and everything. Even stuff, not even emotionally heavy stuff, but even just quite cool, interesting little imperfections that are shown. Like the chamber door breaking in the middle of one of the chamber matches and they have to crowbar it open mid-match. Or like Tiffany Stratton breaking her nose and then Rhea Ripley kind of being concerned backstage, but then joking about it with her. And these are all little moments that I wish there was way more of this than the WWE propaganda that is kind of the dominant thing about every season of this so far. But these positive points don't last forever. We get to the men's chamber and we get, of course, the shocking reveal, oh my God, that the balaclava-wearing man who's been showing up recently and doing Seth Rollins' moves, that's actually Seth Rollins. Can you believe it? I said this at the time when it happened. I hated it. But my issue with it wasn't that they went with Seth, which was the obvious way to go, but the correct way to go as well. That wasn't my issue. My issue was the patronizing tone of it. They expected everybody to be like, oh my God, I can't believe it. Watch Heyman's reaction during that chamber match, during the reveal. He's like, oh my God, no. Well, obviously it was going to be Seth. We're not stupid. And I think this was WWE trying to recapture the magic of Seth Rollins' fake injury cash-in on CM Punk, which we saw in Season 2 when that was the big thing to come out of Season 2 of Unreal. It was like, we fooled everyone. We worked all the fans. They think they know all the secrets, but they don't. Ignoring the fact that half the internet had worked out that Seth was going to do a fake injury cash-in anyway ahead of time. But they ignored that. They pretended in Season 2 like nobody had any idea. And now they've done it again with this Seth reveal. But they don't go as full. I think they've realised that it would be quite embarrassing if they pretended this was some kind of masterstroke. They do still quite like what they've done. They are still a little bit pleased with themselves. We get shots of Seth sneaking into the arena in his ski mask, sneaking down to the chamber and everything. But it's nowhere near as egregious as I found it in Season 2, where it was like borderline insulting to the fans. And so finally, we reach the season finale, WrestleMania 42. We take a look at Liv's horrific-looking injury when Stephanie Vaquer shoves her into Roxanne Perez. We get her also running through the live performance of her entrance music. And the rehearsal, by the way, of this is so good that it brings a tear to the eye of Lyra Valkyria, who's watching on from the sidelines. She's a great worker. What else do we get? We get AJ Lee dropping the women's IC title back to Becky and feeling very proud of herself afterwards, which is nice to see. We get Bron Breakkers running on Seth, and Bron gets emotional about making it back from injury, which is nice to see as well. We get Liv winning the title, big moment for her, of course. And then this bit, this is weird. This was a weird thing to include. Why did they think this was a good thing to include? So, you know, after someone's had a big win at Mania or whatever, it's like their first title win, and Triple H has the big congratulations conversation with them backstage. So Liv's just beaten Stephanie to win the women's world title. She gets backstage, and she's talking to Triple H, who's doing the whole sincere, like, congratulations, you killed it, you were awesome. But remember, that match was like 6 minutes long, which for a title match at WrestleMania is crazy. It would have been a longer match on TV. It would have been a longer match on TV even if the title wasn't on the line, I suspect. But this was a women's title match at WrestleMania, a WrestleMania that was so criticised for all of its incessant ad breaks and the relative lack of wrestling on the show. And they show Liv being congratulated by Triple H, and she says to him, what does she say exactly? She says, did we make up some time? So that and Triple H brushes past this. He's like, yeah, whatever, don't worry about that, the match was awesome. But in asking, did we make up some time, clearly Liv and Steph were told to go shorter than the original plan. For whatever reason, it's not elaborated on, but that's clearly the implication here. And it's heartbreaking to see for both of the women who wrestled that match. And Triple H you can tell he's like, I don't really want to talk about that. And I am amazed this made the final cut. I'm amazed. Such a bad look. Maybe they just didn't think people would pick up on it. I think people will. This is made more interesting by the interview with Stephanie Vaquer afterwards as well. She is visibly downcast. She's almost broken. It's not really explained definitely why. She says that her body is ready to have a rest. She says it's a good time to drop the title because I've been going non-stop for 10 years and I need a break. But she's devastated as she's saying this. She's crying. I don't know if it's her disappointment at being asked to drop the title. I don't know if it is legit and she's just feeling the pain of being banged up and she can't wait. It's the relief of being able to take time off now. I don't know if it's maybe, and again, I don't know this, is it maybe because their match was cut so short, because this comes so soon after the Liv conversation with Triple H. It was still lingering in my mind, and then Stephanie shows up looking like a broken woman. Before we wrap up the final episode, I think it's worth mentioning at this point the things that we don't get to see in the season, which is just as important in a way as the things that WWE are keen to kind of showcase to us. For example, as I mentioned, we don't get anything on Drew winning the belt from Cody and then dropping it to him before Mania. That kind of happens in the background. We also don't get anything on Brock's apparent retirement at WrestleMania. I think I was probably expecting them to cut this, to be fair, given that it was either fake or retconned or whatever happened with Brock, and then he came back and continued to feud with Oba. So that isn't too much of a surprise not to see. The biggest thing that isn't mentioned throughout the season is Roman. Roman is so absent throughout the whole season, really. Yes, he wasn't actually physically around much until the Royal Rumble, and he might not have wanted to do the whole Netflix thing, but to not even touch upon the guy, not to even really mention the guy who is ultimately going to win the last match at WrestleMania, it's quite a glaring omission. So Roman is very curiously absent. I'll touch upon this again after we've talked about the match with Punk, because I think it's fascinating, but I think unintentionally so, maybe. But one thing that does get mentioned, and I was surprised at this, to be fair, I thought they would ignore this as much as they possibly could, but they do mention the catastrophic involvement of Pat McAfee in the feud between Randy Orton and Cody Rhodes. They don't mention it like as much as it dominated the news cycles at the time it was happening though, and it's kind of portrayed here as the same old story. Earlier in the season, we were told that Cena's farewell run wasn't handled badly, the fans just don't know what's best for them. And here we get Cody Rhodes in a talking head segment saying that, hey, Pat's involvement was unpopular. But that's the point of it, you know, to get the heat. I don't think the wrestling industry will ever outgrow this defense mechanism, by the way. The whole like, well, if you didn't like it, that was the point. Sorry, I didn't realize that something was immune from criticism because it was in kayfabe. I'm not saying this is Cody's fault particularly. He's just the talking head who delivers this message to us. Cody then, speaking of Cody's talking head segments, he now makes a very dubious claim, I think, by saying that he enjoyed Mania 42 more than any WrestleMania since he's been back in WWE. Really now? More than 40? I'm a huge fan of Cody Rhodes, right? There is no way that can be true, though. There's no way. Now we get something quite interesting, where as clips of Cody versus Randy are shown, Cody has a voiceover basically explaining the story of the match to us. The story which, in my opinion at least, was not conveyed very well by WWE as the match was going on live. So now we need Cody in the documentary to do a voiceover explaining the match to us. But if it was a success, as WWE are claiming, then surely this wouldn't have been a necessary step, that it would have been self-evident. Like, we see a shot of Michael Hayes celebrating, so much venom in my voice there. We see a shot of Michael Hayes celebrating backstage as the twists and turns of the match unfold. But if we remember rightly, that is not how the general reaction to the match went down in real time. The general consensus was like, what are they trying to do? One interesting thing that we do see is a bit of a deeper insight, a bit of an explanation as to why Cody basically legitimately took the punt kick from Randy after the final bell. It's because there was blood dripping into his eyes, couldn't see Randy's boot coming quick enough to move his head in time, and just ate it. It's brutal. It's shown in quite unflinching detail, both the spot and the aftermath. But it's compelling, I have to admit. And because Cody's just like a wrestler through and through, he is so fine with it. Because he's like, hey, makes it more real. While like his bosses and his colleagues and his wife are all stood around him going like, oh my God, your eye, are you okay? And he's like, hey, it's wrestling, dude. Like, the guy's a legit sicko. Fair play. But I still don't believe he enjoyed this more than WrestleMania 40. I'll never believe that. On to night 2, where CM Punk very confidently says he'll paint a masterpiece in the main event. He does. After seeing Ober's win over Brock and Trick's win over Sami Zayn, we very weirdly skip Rhea Ripley versus Jade Cargill, despite Rhea kind of being one of the featured names in the season so far. Don't know why we didn't get to really see that. And now it's main event time. Now, something I found very surprising here. So we get to the main event, Punk versus Roman. It's recapped in quite straightforward fashion. We see how excellent the action is, and it speaks for itself. What a match it was. I personally loved it. I'm sure many of you did as well. But the thing I find weird and fascinating here is that it is sold to us entirely as CM Punk's masterpiece alone. I talked about how Roman wasn't really getting mentioned earlier on. This is where it is most glaring. This is all about how great Punk's performance was. It's all about how he nailed the high spot through the announce table, how well he sold his exhaustion at the end, how his vision for this match became an amazing success. And that's all true, but it takes two to tango, right? Roman was in this match. He played his part very well too. He won the match. He won the title in the main event of WrestleMania. He's probably still the biggest star in WWE, and they don't really mention him at all. It's like CM Punk could have been having this match against anybody. Now, I have no doubt that, Punk would have taken the lead in the match as the more experienced wrestler. He'll probably have had more of a hand in its construction and everything. But this is absolute Roman Reigns erasure. It's very mysterious. I get that Punk's a featured person in Season 3. We're going to focus on him a bit more. But in all the other matches, they do at least mention the other party in the match, surely. What's different about Roman here then? Are those rumours of a disconnect within WWE true? With Roman like being TKO's boy rather than WWE's boy, you know what I mean? I don't know, man. And it's the sort of thing that I think a lot of like casual or non-wrestling fans watching this won't have even picked up on at all. But I think quite a lot of people will watch this and think, Roman's not getting much of a mention. Anyway, on that bizarre note, with Punk vowing to come back next year and be even better, that's Season 3 of WWE Unreal, some of the highlights. That's it in the books now. I'll end the video on this thought. WWE Unreal claims to be a documentary series where it peels back the curtain. It shows us the secrets behind wrestling. It's not really that. I think it's just another layer of kayfabe. Some of it is legit, okay? I have no doubts. The stuff like Punk and AJ talking about Larry, the stuff with Cena and his work with children, Seth and Liv and Braun all going through their injury woes, that all hits hard and that's all definitely real. But the bits that I called WWE propaganda before, the bits dealing with WWE's creative process, I find watching Unreal, I find those bits almost unbearably self-conscious. It's not really WWE pulling back the curtain and giving us this behind-the-scenes thing. It's WWE curating the way it is viewed behind the scenes. Yep, just another layer of kayfabe. It's working the fans in the modern age. That's depressing. Thank you very much for watching. I've been Jack the Jobber, and leave your thoughts and opinions in the comments section down below. Like the video as well if you don't mind. It really helps out the channel and all that sort of stuff. And there's not much more to say. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you very soon.